Athlon Sports always does an annual anonymous survey of opposing coaches talking about their various conference mates, and BYU is no exception. How do those comments hold up in the aftermath of the Jake Retzlaff situation where the Cougars might not have their QB1?
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, executive producer at the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City, Utah, and a 13-year credentialed media member at BYU. I am your resident BYU insider and expert, and as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day, and more importantly, thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, coming up on today's show, we're talking about anonymous coaches sounding off on BYU football and how some of those comments might look if BYU doesn't have Jake Retzlaff in the lineup this fall. Then we'll talk about BYU basketball and a huge non-conference game announced or revealed yesterday. They will take on UConn in Beantown. Speaking of Boston, Massachusetts, we'll finish up today's show back on the football front as we've got the snip, snap of BYU football with Kalani Sitake officially announcing he is now signed with the BYU football program. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Now, I have to give massive credit to Athlon Sports. I'm not 100% certain how they do this every single year, but they reach out to opposing coaches within the various conferences and get their unfiltered thoughts on their various conference opponents and obviously print them because they're anonymous. Coaches will sound off if they are granted anonymity, and that's a very common thing. But I always got to give credit to Athlon Sports for their legwork in doing this because it's not an easy thing to do. But they had their comments from opposing Big 12 coaches about the BYU football program. And some of them obviously stand out because they're just simply BYU. And other ones might stand out because, well, the quarterback situation for BYU is quite unsettled at the moment. So there are, 5 different arguments here. We'll roll through them in order of the way that they were printed by Athlon Sports. The number one comment is the longest, and I think actually is the strongest to what BYU is trying to build as members of the Big 12 Conference. So here it is, quote, "This is a physical defense that gives you real problems. I think they're successful because they're a development culture, and that culture is contact and aggression. Their style runs counter to the offensive mentality of the league really well, and they embrace contact. It's a hard place to play when you're on the road too," unquote. There you go. BYU's defense. We talked about it yesterday, how BYU has brought in the likes of an Alvin Puefua to obviously bolster their interior of their defensive line. BYU anticipates that their defense this year is going to be even better than it was a season ago, and it was a top 40 metrics-wise defense a season ago. It was a big reason why BYU went 11-2 is Jay Hill and his masterful execution of his scheme and obviously the players he put in a position to succeed on the field for BYU. That physical defense is absolutely a brand BYU aspires to, and it absolutely has kind of made their own. I do find it kind of funny that it says their style runs counter to the offensive mentality of the league really well, and they embrace contact. I will agree. BYU absolutely embraces contact. Kalani Sitake runs some of the more physical practices you will find anywhere in college football, and all he has to say when we ask him about it is the only way to play football is to, play football, actually tackling people. Is that opening you up to injuries? Absolutely. But BYU's got a really, really strong strength and conditioning staff, as well as a sports science staff that makes sure the players are in the best shape that they can be. That should allay some of those concerns about BYU and the physical nature that they play with. So I really respect that comment because I do think it's what BYU is trying to do. Now, I would quibble with their style running counter to the offensive mentality because, let's be honest, the history of BYU football suggests that they are an offensive first team. That could change. Could they be a defense first team? That we'll see with BYU. Number 2 comment, quote, "They could have played in and won the championship last year. I think they'll be right back there in the hunt with Jake Retzlaff." Well, we'll see. If he can take that next step and refine the decision-making, they're going to be really hard to beat, unquote. Well, that comment obviously came probably weeks, if not months, before we found out what happened last week, the civil lawsuit filed against Jake Retzlaff. And as of recording of this podcast, very much still pending. There is a whole lot that we've talked about in recent podcasts, but If Jake Retzlaff is available to play, that's a great point. If he can refine the decision-making, they're going to be really hard to beat. Without Jake Retzlaff, that comment could be construed as BYU might be dead in the water. Now, I don't think that they're dead in the water. I think guys like McKay Hillstead, Trayson Bourget, and even Bear Bachmeyer bring a lot to the table and obviously would help BYU tread water. But I've said it before that let's say BYU ceiling this year with Jake Retzlaff was a 10-win team. Without him, I think it drops by probably 1 to 2 wins, where you're probably looking maybe at 8-4 as your ceiling versus 10-2. Could I be dead wrong about that? Could a guy like McKay Hillstead, a Trayson Bourget, or heck, even a Bear Bachmeyer erupt and become the next face of the BYU football program? I'm not ruling that out, but right now I would say it's probably a long shot that pulls off. Next comment. This is an interesting one. If there's a weakness, it might be their offensive line, unquote. Now, BYU is turning over a bit of their offensive line. Obviously, Connor Pay, Braden Keim, as well as Caleb Etienne have all exited the program. In their stead, you've got guys like Bruce Mitchell at the center spot, Waylon Lapuaho at left guard. You bring in Andrew Gentry, who has recently been fully cleared to resume football activities. He figures to play one of the tackle spots. Isaiah Jota is a guy that Aaron Roderick has a broken record in saying that he thinks he's an NFL caliber offensive lineman. So you probably pencil in Isaiah Jota at one of those spots. And then Austin Leusa is obviously a swing candidate, whether he plays guard or tackle, could be a major weapon for BYU. If the weakness is their offensive line, that is a concern for BYU, especially having an unsettled quarterback position. Quarterback obviously wants to be comfortable in the pocket, and that requires a strong, cohesive offensive line. I will just say this about that. If they perceive it to be a weakness, go for it. TJ Woods, I know that he will be coaching his guys up and he will put them in positions to succeed. He has proven that at every point during his coaching journey, whether that was at Utah State, whether it was at Wisconsin, Oregon State. He's worked at the likes of Georgia Southern, and now he's at BYU, and his offensive line play traditionally under him as a position coach, very, very strong. Next one, quote, picking up all the Utah guys in the portal was a pretty big statement for them, unquote. That's not going to sit well with Utah fans, but let's also be honest. BYU brought in Carson Ryan. BYU brought in Keanu Tanavasa, and simply put, there was nothing Utah could do about it. I'm not trying to come off as pompous. I'm not trying to come off as arrogant, but BYU won recruiting battles, and we'll talk about another recruiting battle they just won against another former Pac-12 school here in just a little bit. But they did make a statement. I think it said to Utah, hey, y'all thought you had the upper hand on us for years, and you did. BYU was a Power 5 adjacent program for a decade and change as an independent football program, while Utah reaped the benefits of being a part of the Power 5 and being on the inside, being a Power 5 program in the Pac-12. That's completely changed since BYU finally got that Power Now 4 label attached to their name. Look at what they're doing on the recruiting front. Look at what they're doing in NIL. Look at how they're operating in the transfer portal. It is undeniable that BYU is a force, and it's irking certain fan bases, none more so than the 40 miles north of Provo, Utah, speaking of the University of Utah. Now, the final comment here, I think, is the biggest compliment to BYU in this article from Athlon Sports. Quote, I think they're a legit power in this league, unquote. That's what BYU aspires to be. Rondo Fehlberg said it on my radio station, the KSL Sports Zone, that BYU is not going to go out there and puff out their chest and say, hey, we're the big dog of this conference. That's the term he used. He said that we, speaking of BYU, because he formerly was the athletic director, said that we, speaking collectively of Brigham Young University, we don't want to be saying that about ourselves. We want other people in the league to say that about us. At least one coach believes that BYU is a legit power in this league. Now, it's obviously up to BYU to go out there and assert themselves and reiterate to people time and time again, that they are a power, that they are a big dog, and let those people say it for you. It doesn't look good when you say it for yourself, but when you go out there and talk softly and carry a big stick, to use the Teddy Roosevelt expression, that goes a long way to establishing yourself, as they said, as a legit power in the Big 12 Conference. So, some very complimentary thoughts from various coaches, some interesting thoughts about the offensive line. Obviously, the quarterback play with Jake Retzlaff, will he or won't he play? But BYU looks like they have really made some inroads since joining this league and have made some believers out of opposing coaches in the Big 12 as well. Coming up next, we're going to talk BYU basketball, another high-profile game. Maybe the game of the non-conference slate for BYU has finally been set, and it's going to take AJ DeBonsa right home to where he grew up near Brockton, Massachusetts, playing just a stone's throw away in Boston. What does it mean that Kevin Young and the BYU basketball program continue to pile up these Q1 games and are essentially going to be barnstorming all over the country? I think it's a good thing, and we'll explain more next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, my friends, and every night delivers a highlight-worthy performance. It seems like major momentum shifts and obviously can't miss moments because it's the playoffs. Simply put, whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action than do it with our friends over at FanDuel. They make it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, performance trends, and even same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And the best part is during these games, you can obviously feel like you got to read on a player who's heating up. You want to take advantage of that feeling? Why not back it up with a same-game parlay? And how could a $200 bonus add to the excitement if your first $5 bet hits? It's as simple as that. So go check out FanDuel. It's the perfect time to sign up. Go to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you get $200 in bonus bets. Simple as that. $5 bet. If it wins, $200 in your account. Simple. Make every moment more and do it with our friends at FanDuel. They are an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you have not done so already, please continue to subscribe, rate, review, share with your family and friends. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'm pointing down on the screen. Click that like button. Let us know that you like this show and let us get feedback. Drop your comments. I appreciate anybody who takes the time to sound off, whether you like the show, whether you hate it. All the same, it helps me get a feel for what people are looking for from this podcast. So thank you, as always, for y'all's support. All right, let's talk BYU basketball. It was revealed yesterday, John Rothstein, the first, reported that BYU and UConn, yes, the UConn Huskies, are going to face off in TD Garden Arena, which is the home of the Boston Bruins, but also the Boston Celtics in downtown Boston, Massachusetts, in a non-conference game coming up this November. It's expected to be the second weekend of the season, as Rothstein said, either November 14th or the 15th. Now, BYU football plays a home game against TCU, which could be a fairly large in terms of the stakes it could hold on it at that point in the season on November 15th. So if I'm Kevin Young and company, if you want more, I guess, attention from Cougar Nation, I'd be pushing to play this game on the 14th. And then in theory, people could rush home, get on a plane from Boston and get back to Utah for that TCU game. But I think the other side of it is that this is a big game on the non-conference slate. And according to guys like Robbie McCombs, BYU's not done yet. I've said this before on the podcast, and I'll reiterate it here, that AJ DeBonsa has made a lot of headlines and has brought a lot of attention to BYU basketball, and all of it good, seemingly. The biggest thing that he can do is that he is bringing just an attention, a spotlight, a limelight on BYU basketball that they cannot waste. And that's why I think Kevin Young and company have been so eager and so aggressive in scheduling maybe the best non-conference slate that BYU has ever scheduled. Now, we don't know the full non-conference slate. It's supposed to be revealed any day now. Brian Santiago apparently made that comment at the annual Fathers and Sons camp over the weekend at BYU, and I can't wait to see what ultimately entails. But Robbie McCombs also says that obviously UConn and BYU will be maybe a top 10 matchup when they square off. He says that there's another top 25 team out there that BYU could be scheduling a game against. Could that be in the Delta Center? Could it be in Provo? Could it be on the road? It doesn't really matter. The thing is, BYU is getting all this attention and is actually getting more of these programs to essentially bite on facing off against the Cougars because AJ DeBonsa brings eyeballs that, simply put, other programs simply can't draw to them. He started a YouTube channel not too long ago. He was in Monaco, of all places, over the weekend for the Monaco Grand Prix. He is traveling literally the world wide, and the attention and the positive ambassador that he is for Brigham Young University, in particular the BYU basketball program, it is uncalculable what it means for BYU. There was a lot made of him making reportedly $5, $6, $7 million. Some reports were high as $8 million in NIL money when it came to why he picked BYU. I had it reiterated to me not too long ago, and it was something I've said on the podcast previously, that the thought is that, BYU may be paying AJ DeBonsa, between $5 and $8 million for a potential just one season playing in Provo. But the calculus on the impact he can have in terms of the eyeballs he will draw to BYU, the impact just overall that he can have with being an ambassador for BYU basketball, bringing people that may not otherwise understand anything about BYU and obviously the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I've had it told that his NIL money, the return on it, the ROI in terms of the exposure is tenfold. So if he's making $7 million in NIL this year, the expectation is BYU's reaping $70 million worth of exposure in return. I was told that AJ DeBonsa could be worth $100 million in exposure for BYU all told when his time at BYU is done. That's incredible. And that makes, in essence, every dime that BYU is paying this young man in NIL money worth it, because you're reaping massive, massive benefits. Now, not all that's going to come back to you in obviously in cash or a credit form. You're not going to get straight up money, the $100 million. But once again, the exposure alone that he generates, the being an ambassador for BYU. He went to church not that long ago. He's traveling to the Monaco Grand Prix wearing BYU gear. His dad, Ace, has been very effusive in saying that Kevin Young and BYU have gone above and beyond to make them feel comfortable. And obviously, they believe that it's the best place for a guy like AJ DeBonsa, who is likely to be the number one pick in next year's NBA draft. They believe it's the best place for him to develop his skills and obviously hone his craft as he looks forward to what will be, hopefully, a fairly lucrative, if not ultra lucrative, NBA career. So BYU is paying quite a bit of money to this kid, but the other side of it is they're getting all kinds of big-time games. UConn on the schedule. They're going to play non-conference games against Miami, Georgetown, or Dayton in their MTE event. They're playing Villanova on opening night in Las Vegas. They've got Clemson in Madison Square Garden on December 9th. They do have two bye games already, about Delaware on November 11th and Eastern Washington on December 22nd, but you can't play all Q1 games in their non-conference slate. But right now, you open up with a exhibition game at Nebraska, also an exhibition game in the Delta Center against North Carolina. Those two are high exposure games. And I need to correct something I said on yesterday's podcast. I said that the money generated from those exhibitions needs to go to charity. That used to be the old format. It's no longer that. Essentially, Nebraska and North Carolina, along with BYU, can sit down, say, hey, this is what we're projecting we're going to make on this. Where do you guys want to do it? Do you guys want to invest it in NIL? They can find a different avenue, it feels like, to put the money into. And I would imagine that the Delta Center with North Carolina and the history that the Tar Heels possess, coming to Salt Lake City, even though it's an exhibition game, I would be hard-pressed not to think that's going to have a very, very strong showing. And it could generate quite a bit of money for BYU and obviously North Carolina as well. BYU traveling to Nebraska. A lot of Cougar fans out there in the Midwest. I know art director BYU, you're in Iowa, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure that he would be making the drive over to watch BYU play at Nebraska. I've been to Lincoln. It's a first-rate college campus, and they got a great basketball venue. Villanova on opening night. I can't reiterate enough what AJ DeBonsa has brought to BYU, but the one thing he has brought is exposure and obviously getting BYU games that they otherwise probably don't get. I wouldn't think that UConn and what the UConn Huskies are doing, they wouldn't be thinking, hey, let's play BYU in Boston. They'd be like, okay, whatever. We can probably find a different game. But the fact that he went to the drawing table on this, backed away from it, and then came back to negotiate it means that UConn sees value in it. And it obviously is, because UConn can play in Boston and obviously draw a lot of fans to TD Garden Arena. BYU will also draw from the East Coast. There's going to be a lot of comments about, hey, Cougar fans travel No, they didn't travel from Utah. They traveled from New York. They traveled right there from Boston. They traveled from the DMV area down there in Virginia and obviously Washington, D.C. They're going to draw all over the country. And this is awesome to see, because it shows the brand that BYU has and has obviously been heightened by AJ DeBonsa. And now he gets to go home and play in front of his hometown fans. Brockton, Massachusetts is where he was born and raised. And now he gets to go and play a stone's throw away from where he grew up in Boston. And that's a really cool thing that BYU did to make sure that he played close to home for at least one game during his run at BYU. All right, coming up next, we'll finish up this show going back to the football front. BYU picked up another big-time commitment. Their their third four-star commitment from the 2025 recruiting cycle, essentially since the recruiting cycle actually ended. We'll explain how they pulled it off and who Kalani Sitake is next, coming up right here on Locked On Cougars. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you have not done so already, sign up for the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. Get the inside scoop on all things BYU sports, and I am hearing every single day in the form of a text message coming to your phone. You get a 14-day free trial to see if it's the right option for you, and it's just $5 a month to be part of the Insiders Group. Sports the show and obviously get you the inside intel that you crave. So join us today on the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right, if you did not see the news yesterday, and it came out of the clear blue for at least for me, Kalani Sitake has signed with the BYU football program. Now, some of you may remember that name, some of you may not. This kid has had quite a high-profile recruitment, and it comes down to essentially I've never seen, and I'm admitting something here. I have never seen the entire series of The Office all the way through. I know a lot of the moments. I know a lot of the memes that are out there, but I've never seen the entire show. But I do know there is this snip, snap meme that I see all the time on social media, and it fits what Kalani Sitake did here during his recruitment. Remember, this is a kid who played at Timpview High School and then moved to Bishop Gorman High School down in Las Vegas. Plays on the interior of Bishop Gorman's highly touted football program, on the interior of their offensive line at center, and maybe the strongest high school offensive lineman I have seen in quite some time. He is a powerful individual, 6'4", 300+ pounds, and there are some people that believe that at some point in the near future, obviously after he gets home off of a mission, because that's the other strange thing about this, is he signed with BYU despite already being in the mission field. He's serving a mission in the Denver area, if I recall correctly. Speaking of Denver, Colorado, but he is signed with BYU. If you remember his recruitment out of Bishop Gorman, he committed to Oregon. Then obviously decided to flip his commitment to BYU last football season, speaking of 2024. And then just days, it wasn't even days. It was the day of the early signing window. There was kind of a question like, hey, why hasn't Kalani Sitake signed with BYU yet? Well, it comes out that he has flipped his commitment back to the Ducks and signed with Oregon. So he signed the paperwork, obviously, and was going to be an Oregon Duck. And now, 4 or 5 months later, he's decided BYU is where his heart lies and where he wants to be. Could he change his mind again? I guess he could. But for now, celebrate the win for BYU. This is their third 4-star pickup in the past month and change. Nusi Taumueapea obviously transferring from Stanford in the wake of Troy Taylor's firing. Bear Bachmeier, same deal, a 4-star quarterback in his own right, comes to BYU after Troy Taylor was fired, and he ultimately decided to transfer out of the Stanford football program. And now you still one of the top-tier prospects from the Oregon Ducks, and I say top tier because if I recall correctly, Mitch Harper may have written this, I think. He is, speaking of Kalani Sitake, he would be the 8th highest rated signing all time for BYU if you go by recruiting rankings. Obviously, they go back to the late 90s in most people's minds, early 2000s. It's a pretty incredible pickup for BYU. Obviously serving a mission, so he's a part of the 2027 recruiting cycle if you want to keep track at home, so you will not see him for a little while. But he's got family connections to BYU. I believe it was his brother-in-law. Is it Sonny Makasini? I'm trying to remember who it was that his sister is married to inside the BYU football program, and that obviously was a draw when he originally flipped to BYU. But then I'll be blunt, NIL and some of the offers that Oregon was throwing his way, I wouldn't have it would have been hard for me to ignore the amount of money that Oregon was apparently willing to offer him in NIL to flip back and sign with the Ducks. Ultimately, as Hart decided he wanted to be a BYU, I can't rule out that BYU maybe came back with an NIL offer, but this is a kid out there serving the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as a full-time missionary. I don't think he's in hard negotiations with Coug Connect or with the Royal Blue Collective about, hey, I need this amount of money to sign with BYU, because, he's kind of got other things on his priority list. But really, really crazy recruitment, but all's well that ends well for BYU. And as I said in my YouTube short, to quote the famous line from Dumb and Dumber, this proves once and for all that you cannot triple stamp a double stamp. You're welcome, everybody. All right, but the other thing about this real quick is it shows that BYU's got major cachet on the recruiting front. NIL has played a role in it, absolutely. But I believe for years, and I think a number of you out there believed this right along with me, that if and when BYU finally was able to recruit on an even playing field with the likes of Utah and the rest of the Power Four out there, that BYU would more than hold their own. We are just seeing BYU start to blossom as a recruiting power. And it goes back to a topic we had on today's podcast in that first little stanza. I think BYU is a legit power. That was one of the quotes from an anonymous coach inside the Big 12. Well, you know what? What makes you a power is to have legitimate 4-star talent. I have long said that BYU has routinely brought in 2- and 3-star talent, speaking of the recruiting process and the recruiting rankings, and they have gotten 4- and 5-star production out of those players. What could you do with more? I say it all the time. What can you do more with more? Well, you know what more is? 4-star talents. High-level 3-star talents that BYU could have only dreamed of landing when they were an independent football program. And guys said, hey, I want to play Power 5 football. Love you, BYU, but I'm going somewhere else. That's completely changed. The whole identity for BYU on the recruiting front is changing right before our very eyes. They're bringing in legit 4-star talents, and those 4-star players, you're going to build the next iteration of BYU football under Kalani Sitake on the backs of those guys. And it sure looks like the future is very, very bright for BYU. Yeah, I know right now it seems a little murky with the Jake Retzlaff situation obviously pending out there, but the other side of it is there are 22 players on the field at any given 11 players on the field at any given time, 22 players offensively and defensively in a game. Quarterbacks are of utmost importance. There's no doubt about it, but you have to have other players around them to succeed. And a guy like Kalani Sitake, he's probably going to be the center of the future for BYU. And BYU's had some pretty good centers of late. Connor Pay, Tejan Karoma, Jake Empey. They've had James Empey, not Jake Empey. James Empey. They've had some really, really strong offensive linemen. I like Kalani Sitake, at least on paper, looks like he is as good, if not better than those guys coming into BYU. He's rated 94 by 24/7 Sports. He adds, once again, to an incredibly strong 2025 recruiting cycle. And the crazy thing is, even with those additions to the 2025 cycle, 2026 could one-up it. That's what BYU is doing right now. They are completely changing their whole image on the recruiting trail. And it's happening, as I mentioned, right before our very eyes. Enjoy it. This is the coming of age moment for Kalani Sitake and the BYU football program. It's something they have long craved, the chance to really recruit with a Power 4 label attached to their name. NIL has absolutely changed the game, the transfer portal as well. But BYU's taken advantage of every opportunity given to them. And what we are observing now is the fruits of those labors. It's not been easy. BYU had to grind for a really, really long time. A, to get into the Big 12, and obviously B, to go out there and bounce back from a 5-7 debut campaign that had some people worried they couldn't compete at the Power 4 level. And then they put together an 11-2 campaign last year that showed, oh yeah, they absolutely can compete. That's what young men want to do. They want to play high-level football, but more importantly than that, they want to win along with it. They want to develop their skills and go to the NFL. That's kind of the next step for BYU is to get these 4-star talents into the program, develop them, get that, once again, 5-star production from them, and then send them off to a professional career if that's what's in the cards for them. It's a really, really cool thing to watch BYU becoming what a lot of us, and yours truly included, wanted and have hoped they could be for quite some time. And it's literally happening in real time right now. All right, that is going to do it for today's edition of the podcast. As always, thank you so much for your support. Continue to subscribe, rate, review, share it with your family and friends. Let them know it's daily BYU content that's available on demand wherever you get your podcasts, also available on YouTube. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And once again, thank you to all of you who are everydayers right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.